The town barely noticed when she moved in. It was the kind of place where people lived slow, where church bells rang on Sundays, where kids pedaled bikes along cracked sidewalks, and where everyone thought they knew everyone else's story. She fit in without drawing attention. She rented a modest house on the edge of Main Street, painted white with faded shutters, the kind that blended into the background. To the locals, she was simply another face polite, quiet, reliable. To anyone who looked deeper, her stillness carried a weight that set her apart, though no one could name why. Her days followed predictable patterns. She walked her dog, a mutt with mismatched eyes, at the same hour each morning. She shopped at the corner grocery, never buying more than she needed. She nodded kindly to the cashier, answered questions briefly, and never lingered long in conversation. In a town where gossip was currency, her silence gave people little to trade. They assumed she was private, perhaps shy, perhaps just tired from a life lived elsewhere. Nobody knew her history. Nobody asked. And she never volunteered a single detail. What no one realized was that the quiet woman in their town had once been someone very different. Her name had circulated in hushed military circles, attached to missions so secret that even other operators rarely heard them discussed. She had been trained in a world where precision meant survival, where patience was sharper than any blade, and where mistakes were buried along with the people who made them. Her record was clean, not because she had been lucky, but because she had been exceptional. Yet none of that followed her here. In this town, she was just another resident. Sometimes, though, her past revealed itself in subtle ways. A car backfiring would not make her jump, but her eyes would flick to the source instantly. When the neighborhood kids played mock gunfights with firecrackers, she didn't complain about the noise, but her posture shifted ever so slightly, her shoulders tensing before she consciously released them. At the diner, she always chose the seat with a clear view of the door and windows. None of it was intentional anymore. It was simply how she was built. Training like hers didn't fade with time. It lived in the bones. Her neighbors, if they ever noticed, assumed it was habit born from hardship. Perhaps she had grown up rough. Perhaps she had seen something difficult in her past. The truth was stranger and heavier than anyone could guess. She had walked battlefields most Americans only saw on the evening news. She had lain in the dirt, waiting motionless for hours in heat and cold alike. Her breathing slowed until it was indistinguishable from the wind. She had watched through her scope as danger crept close, then pulled the trigger at the perfect moment, never too soon, never too late. The irony was that she had never seen herself as extraordinary. In the service, she was one among many another cog in a machine of shadow operations. But when she left, she discovered how little her old world resembled civilian life. Here, people debated sports scores and grocery prices, while she remembered split-second decisions that had determined life or death. They thought of danger as a statistic on television. She thought of it as something that breathed and moved, something she had studied more closely than most would ever know. At night, her house was dark, except for the glow of a single lamp by the window. She read books more than she watched television. Military thrillers made her smile. Faintly fiction rarely captured the reality. Instead, she preferred biographies, history, or the occasional poetry collection. Words grounded her, helped her keep distance from the memories that sometimes surfaced uninvited. In dreams, she found herself back in deserts and forests, hearing the crunch of boots on dry soil, feeling the weight of her rifle in her hands. She would wake with her dog's head resting on her chest, the steady warmth of his presence pulling her back to safety. The townsfolk respected her boundaries. They invited her to potlucks, though she rarely stayed long. They welcomed her, too. Church, though she preferred to sit in the back row, slipping out before too many greetings could pin her in place. Over time, people grew accustomed to her presence, the way they might to a stone in the riverbed. She wasn't flashy, wasn't talkative, wasn't part of the gossip wheel. But she was solid, reliable, always there. If someone needed help carrying groceries, she stepped forward. If an elderly neighbor's car wouldn't start, she quietly fixed it without fuss. They began to trust her without knowing why. Children waved at her as she passed, their parents reassured by her calm smile. The sheriff once joked that if trouble ever came to town, she'd be the one he wanted on his side. She only laughed softly, brushing it off, though his instinct wasn't wrong. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already faced the worst the world could throw. Still, she hoped the worst would never come here. That was the point of moving, finding a place untouched by the chaos she had left behind. Here, life was ordinary, and ordinary was precious. She let herself believe she could disappear into it, piece by piece, until her past blurred and softened like an old photograph. Yet deep down, she knew the truth. Her skills, her instincts, her history were not erased. They waited, dormant, like embers beneath ash. Sometimes, when she stood on her porch in the fading light, she wondered if anyone would ever know the full story of who she was. Not the neighbors, not the grocery clerks, not even the sheriff with his curious eyes. They would never know of the missions that never made the news, of the enemies whose names she never learned, of the comrades she had buried without ceremony. She carried it all quietly, like a secret oath. And so, the town continued to see her as ordinary, just a woman who lived alone, kept to herself, and smiled when spoken to. But beneath that simple surface lived a history carved by fire and discipline. She had stepped away from it willingly, trading shadows for sunlight, rifles for grocery lists, and classified orders for the sound of church bells. Yet the part of her that had once made her unstoppable had not vanished. It lingered quietly, unseen, waiting for the day the world might demand her again. For now, though, she remained hidden in plain sight, a veteran whose legend was locked away, living a life no one suspected was anything but ordinary. News of the threat didn't reach her at first. She lived far from command centers and intelligence briefings, far from the whisper networks where danger was measured in shifting borders and intercepted transmissions. But beyond her quiet town, a storm brewed. Somewhere along the edge of America's borders, a hostile unit had slipped in under cover of chaos. They were trained, disciplined, and dangerous. Unlike petty criminals or smugglers, this group carried intent sharpened like a blade. Their mission was disruption, destruction, and fear. And for the first time in years, American soil sat in their crosshairs. The military responded, as it always did, with speed and precision. SEAL teams were deployed, their best snipers positioned in hidden perches overlooking suspected enemy routes. Drones circled overhead, transmitting grainy footage of movement through forests and ravines. At first, commanders were confident. The SEALs rarely failed. But the enemy was clever. They moved unpredictably, blending into terrain, using weather and cover to their advantage. Shots were lined up and missed, not because of poor aim, but because the targets disappeared at the last possible second, leaving only shadows in scopes. The first attempt ended with silence. The enemy had not been eliminated. Worse, they had vanished deeper into the landscape, still intact, still dangerous. Commanders called another operation, shifting positions, recalculating. Again, the SEAL snipers tried. Again, conditions betrayed them. Winds changed suddenly, visibility faltered, and hostile movement outmaneuvered even the most seasoned trigger fingers. Frustration mounted. These weren't rookies missing shots. These were decorated warriors, men whose accuracy had been proven in war zones across the globe. Yet somehow, this enemy slipped through untouched. In private rooms, whispers grew. "We need someone different," one officer said. "Someone who won't miss, no matter what." At first, the idea seemed absurd. The Seals were among the best. Who could they call upon that hadn't already been tried? That's when a name surfaced, spoken reluctantly, almost reverently, as though it were a secret best left buried. A woman. A veteran who had long ago disappeared into civilian life. Her record was hidden, her missions redacted, but those who knew her whispered about her position. She had done what even elite teams had sometimes failed to do. The suggestion was met with silence, then disbelief. "She's retired," one commander said flatly. "Gone. Out of the system." But the officer who raised her name only shrugged. "And yet," he replied, "she's the one they trusted when no one else could deliver. If she's still out, there, she may be the answer." Finding her wasn't easy. Her records were locked behind layers of clearance. Even her last known address was outdated, buried in files meant to fade into obscurity. Yet eventually, the trail led to her quiet town, to the small white house with faded shutters, where she lived unnoticed among ordinary people. It was almost surreal, a contrast between the life described in classified files and the life she now led. But when the knock came on her door, the past collided with the present in a way she could no longer ignore. She opened the door to find two men in plain clothes. Their posture gave them away before their words did, rigid, alert, scanning everything in sight. They introduced themselves without names, only affiliations, the kind that spoke more through tone than through explanation. "We need to talk," one said simply. She hesitated, the weight of old instincts stirring within her chest. For a moment, she considered closing the door, pretending none of it mattered anymore. But something in their eyes told her this was serious. She stepped aside, allowing them in. They sat at her kitchen table, maps and photos spread across the worn wood where only days earlier she had been reading a book of poetry. The images were stark, hostile units moving in formation, carrying weapons with intent. Satellite shots revealed trails carved through forests, safe houses tucked in abandoned structures, escape routes threading across terrain. The men spoke with clipped urgency, describing failed operations, missed shots, and the danger still alive. "We've tried everything," one said. "They're slipping through every net. We can't afford another failure." She listened. In silence, her expression unreadable. They didn't ask outright, not yet, but she knew what was coming. They wanted her back. Her chest tightened at the thought. She had built this life deliberately, brick by brick, to escape the very world they now asked her to re-enter. The quiet streets, the ordinary routines, the anonymity, these were her defenses against a past that had cost her too much. And yet, as they spoke, her instincts stirred like embers catching flame. She studied the maps with the same sharpness she once used in briefing rooms. She saw the patterns others had missed, the opportunities hidden between lines of terrain. "You still see it," one of the men said softly, noticing the way her eyes scanned the documents. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. When they finally asked, their words were simple. "We need you." Silence stretched between them. She rose from the table, walked to the window, and looked out at her quiet street. A neighbor walked. A dog, children pedaled past on bicycles. The world outside her home was peaceful, untouched by the danger whispered in her kitchen. For a moment, she wanted to cling to it, to refuse, to shut the door on her past once and for all. But another image surfaced in her mind. Not her street, not her neighbors, but the faces of families elsewhere, the innocent lives at risk if she said no. She turned back slowly. Her voice was calm, steady. "If I do this," she said, "it's on my terms. No headlines, no parades. When it's done, I disappear again." The men exchanged a glance, then nodded. They had expected nothing less. When they left, the house felt heavier, as though the air itself had changed. She sat alone at the table, staring at the photos, the maps, the faces of enemies who thought themselves untouchable. She knew the decision was already made. She could not let them succeed. The ordinary life she had built would have to wait. For the first time in years, she felt the familiar pull of duty, sharp and undeniable. The war she thought she had left behind had found her again. For hours after they left, the house felt foreign to her, as though the walls had absorbed the weight of their words. The photos and maps still sat on the table, but she had turned them face down, as if that might bury the urgency beneath paper and ink. She walked through her home slowly, touching familiar objects, her books stacked neatly on a shelf, her dog's worn blanket by the couch, the chipped coffee mug she used every morning. Each item was a piece of the quiet life she had built, fragile and deliberate, a life she had promised herself would never again be disturbed by the world she once served. But as she moved through the rooms, she could not escape the truth. The call had awakened something inside her. Her instincts, once dulled by routine, had sharpened in an instant the moment she studied those maps. She saw angles, choke points, lines of fire where no one else had. It wasn't a choice. It was part of her. And it terrified her because it reminded her of who she used to be and who she might still be if she let herself fall back into the shadows. She told herself no. Over and over, she repeated it in her mind. She had done her duty. She had given enough. She had earned her peace. Other people could take the risks now. Younger people. People still carrying the fire. She had walked away for a reason. Yet, as the sun set and the street outside grew quiet, her mind betrayed her. She imagined the enemy. Units slipping further into American soil. She thought of what would happen if they reached their target, if families were caught in the crossfire, if children like the ones who rode their bikes down her street were harmed because she had refused to act. She pressed her hands against the window frame, staring at the faint reflection of her own face, ordinary, calm, but beneath it, she saw the soldier who had never truly left. Her dog whined softly, sensing her turmoil. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur. "I don't want to go back," she whispered, though the words felt hollow even as they left her lips. He leaned against her leg, grounding her, reminding her of the peace she would risk losing. But peace built on denial was no peace at all. She tried to sleep, but the night stretched long and restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blurred images from those photographs. Enemy silhouettes moving like ghosts across terrain. Missed shots. Failed operations. She could almost hear the quiet voices of commanders debating, arguing, desperate for a solution. And then, clearer still, she heard the voices of those she had once served beside men and women who had trusted her, who had depended on her precision when nothing else stood between them and death. Many of them were gone now, buried on foreign soil. She carried their memory like scars. Could she really let their sacrifice mean nothing, simply because she longed for comfort? By dawn, her decision had begun to take shape, though she still resisted saying it aloud. She rose, poured herself a cup of coffee, and sat at the table once more. The photos and maps remained where she had left them, but now, instead of turning them away, she studied them again. She traced the terrain with her finger, following the lines of valleys and ridges. She noted the safe houses, the escape routes. Already, plans were forming in her mind, angles of approach, points of ambush, timing of movement. She didn't want to admit it, but she was preparing, her brain working the problem as though no years had passed since her last mission. Around mid-morning, she walked to her shed, a small wooden structure at the back of her yard. The air inside smelled of oil and wood, the faint aroma of tools and locked away memories. She moved a stack of boxes aside and pulled open a hidden compartment built into the floor. Inside lay a black case, its surface worn but still intact. She stared at it for a long time, her breath shallow. She hadn't touched it in years. Opening it felt like opening a wound. Finally, with a steady hand, she lifted the lid. Her rifle lay inside, gleaming faintly despite the dust. She ran her hand along the barrel, remembering every mission it had accompanied her on, every shot it had fired in silence, every life it had saved, and every life it had taken. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, feeling the weight of all those memories pressing against her chest. For a moment, she almost shut the case again, but instead, she began to clean it. The motions were automatic. Disassemble, inspect, wipe, oil, reassemble. Each step pulled her further from her civilian self and closer to the soldier she had once been. She found a box of hand-loaded rounds, each one crafted with precision years ago, waiting for a day she thought would never come. As she handled them, she realized how natural it all felt, as though no time had passed at all. Her body remembered. Her hands remembered. And deep down, so did her heart. Still, doubt gnawed at her. When she paused, staring at the rifle in her hands, she wondered if she could truly return. Would she still be as sharp? Had time dulled her edge? What if she failed now, when the stakes were higher than ever? The thought haunted her, but another rose to meet it. What if she was the only one who could succeed? What if lives depended on her pulling the trigger just one more time? By evening, she had accepted what she could no longer deny. She would go. Not because she wanted to, not because she sought glory or recognition, but because she could not bear the thought of turning her back while danger stalked innocence. Her life of peace had been built on the sacrifices of others. To refuse this call would be to betray them and herself. She locked the rifle case again, but this time it wasn't buried. She placed it near the door, ready. Then she sat at the table, hands folded, and waited. She knew they would return soon for her answer, and when they did, she would give it. Her voice, when the time came, would be steady and calm, stripped of hesitation. She would say yes, not because she longed to fight again, but because duty was a part of her she could never truly leave behind. And as the sun set on that second day, the quiet woman the town thought they knew was gone. In her place, the hidden warrior stirred, reluctant but resolute, prepared to step once more into the shadows, for the sake of those who would never know her name. When the decision was made, she felt both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter, because the weight of uncertainty had finally lifted. Heavier, because she knew what came next. Acceptance was only the first step. Now came preparation, the ritual. She had practiced so many times before, but not in years. The world outside her house remained oblivious. The grocery store still opened at 7 sharp. Children still played tag in backyards. The church bell still tolled on the hour. But within her home, something shifted. Every movement she made, every thought she entertained, carried purpose again. She was no longer the quiet neighbor on the corner. She was returning to the person she had once been, piece by piece, with a silence that spoke louder than any words. Her first task was mental. She cleared her kitchen table of clutter books, receipts, the small comforts of civilian life, and spread out the maps the men had left her. She studied them with an intensity born of muscle memory. The curves of ridgelines, the density of forests, the placement of old roads. She memorized them until the paper seemed unnecessary. She didn't just look at the terrain. She inhabited it, imagining herself moving through each line and shadow, rehearsing approaches and retreats in her mind until they felt real. While others might have turned to advanced software, she trusted her mind. technology could fail. Batteries died, signals scrambled, satellites blinded. But memory, once sharpened, was reliable in a way machines could never be. She had built her career on instinct honed to perfection. That instinct came alive now, humming in her blood as though it had never left. Next came the weapon. The rifle case sat near the door, waiting. She carried it to the table, set it down with reverence, and opened it slowly. The weapon lay inside like an old companion, patient and familiar. She disassembled it with practiced hands, laying each piece out in careful order. Every part was inspected, cleaned, and oiled. Her fingers moved with efficiency, guided by years of repetition. There was comfort in the ritual, the predictable sequence that never failed her. She found herself remembering old missions as she worked. The desert, heat pressing against her skin as she lay hidden for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. The freezing cold of a mountain pass, where her breath crystallized in the air. The thick humidity of jungles where insects buzzed, but silence was absolute. Each memory was tethered to this weapon, to the feel of its weight, to the rhythm of her breath aligning with her trigger. She did not linger on the faces of those she had, ended only on the lives she had saved because she did not miss. When the rifle gleamed under the kitchen light, she loaded the handcrafted rounds into their box, stacking them neatly. She had made them years ago, precision rounds tuned for accuracy that commercial manufacturers could never match. They were her secret weapon, as much a part of her skill as her steady hands. Each one represented time, patience, and dedication qualities she embodied even now. But preparation was more than weapons and maps. It was body and mind. She pulled her old training gear from the back of her closet, clothes that still smelled faintly of dust and sweat. They fit snugly, reminding her of who she once was. She began stretching, moving through exercises that tested flexibility and control. Push-ups, planks, long, steady runs down quiet back roads at dawn. Neighbors might have seen her jog past and thought nothing of it. They couldn't know she was recalibrating her body for what lay ahead. Her dog followed her everywhere, tilting his head as if sensing the shift. She spoke to him less, her focus turning inward. But at night, when she sat in silence, he pressed against her side, a reminder of the life she had built. He anchored her, keeping her from slipping too deep into the person she had once been. Without him, she feared she might disappear entirely into that world again. Meanwhile, reports filtered in through her contacts short, coded updates passed. To her without fanfare. The enemy unit was still active, still moving. Their unpredictability made them dangerous. Other teams continued to monitor, but struggled to pin them down. The clock was ticking. She knew she had little time to waste. One evening, she sat on the floor of her living room. Lights dimmed and closed her eyes. She breathed slowly, deeply, training her mind into the stillness she would need. Meditation, some would call it. For her, it was preparation. She slowed her heartbeat, controlled her breath, visualized the mission as though it had already happened. She pictured herself crawling across soil, hearing twigs snap under boots, waiting for the exact moment when chaos aligned with opportunity. She saw herself pulling the trigger. She saw herself succeeding. Modern units relied heavily on teams, on layers of technology, on noise and chatter in earpieces. She prepared differently. Her silence was her weapon. Her patience was her shield. Others carried gadgets. She carried memory. Others depended on numbers. She depended on certainty. That difference, she knew, would be the key. By the end of the week, she was ready. The maps were memorized. The rifle was spotless. The rounds were prepared. Her body had remembered its strength, her mind its calm. She did not speak of what she was about to do, not even to the dog who watched her with unblinking loyalty. To the town, she was still the quiet woman with a steady gaze, walking her dog and buying groceries. But beneath that ordinary mask, she was coiled like a spring, ready for the mission that waited. When the knock came again, late one evening, she did not hesitate. She opened the door, saw the men in plain clothes, and gave a single nod. No words were necessary. They saw the rifle case at her side, the set of her shoulders, the clarity in her eyes. She was ready. Without ceremony, without farewells, she stepped into the night, carrying nothing but what she needed. No neighbors saw her leave. No one in town would notice her absence. And by the time she returned, if she returned at all, they would never know how close danger had come, or how silently it had been erased. For now, her preparation was complete. The next step would take her into hostile ground, where silence, patience, and precision would once again define her fate. The night chosen for the operation was moonless, the kind of black sky that swallowed even the faintest silhouette. For most soldiers, such darkness was a hindrance. For her, it was a gift. Darkness leveled the field, stripping away technology, and leaving instinct as the only compass. She thrived in it. The convoy that carried her to the drop-off point was quiet, its lights dimmed, its occupants speaking in clipped whispers. The SEALs riding with her threw quick glances in her direction, curious but restrained. They had heard the whispers, of course. A legend who had vanished years ago, summoned now when even their best had failed. None dared speak it aloud. She remained silent, her face calm, her hand steady on the rifle case resting against her leg. When the truck stopped, she stepped out into the cool air. The scent of pine and damp earth filled her lungs. Around them stretched miles of wilderness forests, dense with shadow, ridgelines jagged against the sky. Somewhere in that expanse, the enemy unit moved like phantoms, confident in their ability to evade pursuit. The SEALs fanned out, their equipment bristling with advanced optics and communication rigs. Small red lights blinked faintly on their gear as they established positions. She carried none of that. No headset. No blinking light. Just the rifle slung across her back, a pack with minimal supplies, and the memory of the maps she had studied until they lived in her mind. One of the younger SEALs approached her, his voice low. "We've set up overwatch along the northern ridge. Visibility's poor. Crosswinds make it tough." He hesitated before adding, "You sure you don't need gear?" She met his eyes. Briefly, her expression unreadable. "Gear makes noise," she said simply, and moved past him into the tree line. From that moment, she was gone. The forest enveloped her. Branches brushed her shoulders. Damp leaves crunched softly under her boots. She moved slowly, deliberately, her body close to the ground, each step placed with care. Where the SEALs shifted with the weight of packs and gear, she flowed, her movements nearly soundless. She listened more than she listened for patterns, for the rhythm of crickets disturbed by a misplaced footstep, for the faint metallic rattle of a weapon carried without care. Hours passed. The forest was a world of whispers, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures, the occasional crack of a branch under shifting weight. To most, these were indistinguishable sounds. To her, they painted a picture. She could tell where animals moved freely, and where silence betrayed something foreign, something human. At one point, she froze. Ahead, a faint shadow crossed between. Trees, gone in an instant. She lowered herself flat against the earth, letting her body melt into the ground. Her breathing slowed until it was indistinguishable from the cool night air. Minutes dragged. The shadow did not return. But she knew the enemy was close. Elsewhere, the SEAL snipers struggled. Perched high on ridges, their scopes scanned endlessly, but the terrain betrayed them. Fog drifted through valleys. Winds shifted suddenly, Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Targets appeared, then vanished before they could lock a shot. Their radios buzzed with terse frustration. Every missed opportunity pushed tension higher. They were the best, yet tonight they were blind. She heard their faint chatter in the distance, carried on the air. It was background noise to her, irrelevant. Her world was here, at ground level, where the earth told secrets no drone or scope could reveal. She crawled forward, inch by inch, belly against the dirt. Twigs snapped somewhere behind her. Instantly, she froze. Silence followed. Most would have turned to look. She did not. She knew better. Instead, she listened. The snap came again, softer this time, followed by a faint breath. Enemy. She waited, her hand resting lightly against her rifle. The seconds stretched into an eternity, until the sound moved away, unaware of her presence. She resumed her crawl, patient as the earth itself. The deeper she moved, the clearer the picture became. She spotted boot prints half buried in mud, fresh enough to glisten with moisture. A discarded wrapper caught on a branch. The faint smell of cigarette smoke carried on the wind. Signs of carelessness, invisible to satellites, but glaring to her trained senses. The unit was near, and they believed themselves unseen. She slowed her pace even further. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. Her body became part of the forest, just another shadow, another branch, another breath of air. She had done this countless times before, in deserts and jungles, in lands far from home. The environment changed, but the principle was always the same. Patience wins. At one point, she lay completely still for nearly an hour, watching a clearing where she suspected movement. The SEALs would never have endured such stillness. Their technology demanded constant scanning, constant reporting. But she was different. She let the forest move around her, let time stretch until the enemy revealed themselves. And they did. A figure crossed the clearing silently, then another, their silhouettes faint but unmistakable. She tracked them with her eyes, committing every detail to memory. She did not fire. Not yet. Timing mattered more than eagerness. As she observed, she noticed something the SEALs had missed. The enemy's formation wasn't random. They moved in a pattern, disciplined but subtle, using decoys to draw attention away from their true path. It was a tactic meant to confuse conventional teams. To most, it worked. To her, it was transparent. She could see where they were headed, and she knew where to intercept them. The night deepened. Mist clung to the forest floor, curling around her as she moved. Her body was damp with dew, her clothes heavy with earth. She didn't mind. Comfort was irrelevant. Only silence mattered. Every inch she advanced brought her closer to the heart of the enemy unit. Meanwhile, frustration boiled over among the SEALs. Their scopes remained useless, their radios filled with static and clipped curses. They were blind hunters, swiping at shadows. In contrast, she felt sharper than ever, her senses alive, her purpose clear. She was no longer the retired woman, living in a quiet town. She was once again the hidden elite, moving unseen into hostile ground, guided not by orders, but by instinct. Hours later, she found herself on a ridge overlooking a valley. Below, faint lights flickered a small camp, carefully concealed beneath the canopy. She could see the enemy unit now, their outlines shifting as they moved around, confident in their secrecy. She lay flat against the ridge, rifle cradled in her arms, scope adjusted with care. She slowed her breathing, letting the world narrow to a pinpoint of focus. This was it. The enemy the SEALs had failed to touch. The unit that had slipped past. Every attempt, they were here, below her, unaware. She could end it now. Not with haste, not with recklessness, but with the precision that had made her a legend. She waited, patient as stone, watching their movements. Timing was everything. Soon, the moment would come when chaos aligned with opportunity. And when it did, she would strike. For now, she remained still, a shadow within shadows, her presence undetectable. The seals struggled above, blind and frustrated. The enemy rested below, confident and careless. And she, silent and unseen, poised on the edge of action, was the balance that would decide everything. The forest held its breath. With her? The first shot was silent, almost imperceptible, swallowed by the thick forest and the rolling fog. She had waited, patient as stone, until the enemy revealed the flaw in their confidence. One lookout, crouched by a dim fire, didn't see her, didn't hear the slight whisper of her breath. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its mark with surgical precision, and the figure dropped silently into the underbrush. She didn't move. She didn't celebrate. Movement was fatal. Observation was everything. Another enemy figure appeared, searching for their fallen comrade, unaware that death could strike twice before even a warning could be whispered. Her second shot was faster, controlled, each movement practiced, perfected. In minutes, two of the enemy had vanished, and chaos began to ripple through the group below. She adjusted her position slightly, shifting like liquid across the ridge, each movement calculated to avoid detection. Every breath measured, every heartbeat accounted for. The forest, once an obstacle, had become her ally, cloaking her presence, muffling her steps, guiding her line of sight to the exact points where the enemy was most vulnerable. From her vantage, she observed the enemy attempting to regroup. Confusion spread among them. They hadn't been trained for this, not for a silent predator who moved unseen, who struck from the shadows with deadly certainty. Their formation faltered, and hesitation replaced confidence. She exploited it. The rifle's scope became an extension of her vision, magnifying the small details the human eye might miss. A hand that twitched too early, a boot that shifted the wrong way, the subtle flash of light on a metal surface. Each detail guided her next decision, each calculation precise. Where snipers had failed at range, she acted closer, with the advantage of terrain and patience. A third figure tried to flank, moving quickly along a path she had anticipated. Her rifle tracked him automatically, as though her body remembered every calculation before she consciously thought it. A single shot. He fell. She remained still, listening. Time stretched. The enemy unit, now aware something was wrong, began shouting commands in hurried tones. Their voices carried faintly. To her ears, panicked and disjointed. But panic was predictable, and she used it. Their attempts at coordination betrayed their positions. She moved again, slowly, deliberately, into a better angle, keeping low, her presence invisible. The SEALs above remained unaware of her systematic dismantling of the unit. Their scopes picked up nothing consistent. Their drones could not penetrate the forest canopy. Yet she knew exactly where each enemy member was, how they moved, and the rhythm they had fallen into without realizing it. They were puppets now, pulled by her patience, their confidence dissolving with every precise shot. Minutes passed, and longer. Each shot she fired was deliberate, measured, deadly. No wasted motion, no missed opportunity. She remained detached, almost clinical, her focus absolute. She could hear the distant buzz of the SEALs comes above, frustration evident in clipped words, but she ignored it. They were observers, spectators. She was the actor, the unseen force that would tip the balance. By now, the unit's movements were frantic. Two had attempted to escape, running blindly through the trees, hoping to lose their unseen assailant. She predicted their path, followed their patterns, and took them down before they had crossed 50 meters. Their confidence shattered completely. They were no longer a team. They were prey. The forest seemed to conspire with her. Branches hid her movements. Fog blurred the edges of visibility. Mist carried the sound of distant shots away, leaving only silence and control where panic had flourished. She became part of the environment, the natural world moving with her rather than against her. In the chaos below, one enemy finally caught a glimpse, a shadow moving like liquid, a fleeting figure on the ridge. Their eyes widened, and for a brief moment, the illusion broke. But she did not hesitate. The rifle tracked the movement, her finger squeezing gently, and he was gone. No cry, no warning, just the silent efficiency that had defined her career. Finally, she paused. She counted mentally. The remaining enemies scattered, unsure of what had happened, unable to coordinate. She had dismantled their formation, removed their key figures, and left them in disarray. The mission, which had frustrated elite SEAL teams for days, was now completed in less than an hour. She lowered the rifle slowly, her body remaining low, blending into the shadows. The forest exhaled quietly around her, leaves rustling as though in approval. She surveyed the scene, committing every detail to memory, positions, movements, errors, understanding that debriefing would be impossible, that no report would fully capture her work. The SEALs finally descended into the clearing, moving cautiously, their eyes scanning for survivors. When they saw the aftermath, disbelief registered on their faces. Each one had trained for this moment, and yet they were outmatched not by firepower or numbers, but by precision and patience. They looked at her, sitting on the ridge above, calm and unflinching, and for a brief moment they saw legend made real. She did not move toward them. She did not speak. She allowed them to process, to witness, to comprehend what had happened. Her work was complete, her role finished. Recognition was irrelevant. The only measure that mattered was mission success, and the enemy unit had been neutralized entirely. Even in this victory, her mind remained alert. She scanned the surrounding terrain, aware of potential reinforcements or unseen threats. She moved slowly, methodically, withdrawing along paths she had already memorized. Every step was measured. No one else knew the forest as intimately as she did tonight. The danger might be gone, but vigilance was never optional. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the trees, painting the forest floor in pale gold, she finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The unit had been dismantled, her precision absolute, and the mission achieved in silence. There was no applause. There was no media. Only the quiet acknowledgement that the threat had been removed, and that the world continued unaware of how close it had come to disaster. She packed her rifle carefully, methodically, as she had done countless times before. The enemy was neutralized. The SEALs were safe. Lives that might have been lost were now preserved. And still, she remained unseen. For a few moments, she allowed herself the faintest satisfaction. Not pride, not joy, but a quiet acknowledgement that skill, patience, and resolve had once again made the impossible possible. She had done what even elite teams could not, without recognition, without fanfare. She had been patient. She had been precise. And she had prevailed. As she began the withdrawal, retracing her path through the forest, the first signs of civilian dawn lit the horizon. Birds began their morning song. Mist curled over the undergrowth. The forest, so recently filled with tension and violence, returned to quiet normalcy. She moved through it as though she had never left, blending back into the shadows, leaving only memory and a faint disturbance in the leaves as proof of her passage. By the time she reached the edge of the ridge, she was no longer the hunter, but again a shadow, invisible to the world, untouched by the noise of recognition. The mission had been completed flawlessly, but to her neighbors, to the world beyond the forest, nothing had changed. She had struck where others failed. She had moved silently where others could not. And in the quiet aftermath, she allowed herself. One thought, the world was safe for now, because she had been willing to step back into the shadows, alone, patient, and unflinching. The forest was quiet now, almost impossibly so. The enemy unit she had dismantled lay scattered and defeated, their carefully coordinated plans reduced to chaos by a single unseen force. Birds began to stir, their songs timid in the early morning. Light, as if hesitant to break the hush that had settled over the terrain. A faint mist hovered above the ground, curling around the fallen leaves and scattered footprints, erasing traces of the battle except for those who had been trained to. Notice. The seals emerged from the tree line cautiously, moving with measured steps. Their eyes scanned the area, alert, calculating, as though expecting a final, unseen counterattack. But there was nothing. No ambush, no traps. Only the silence of victory, achieved through stealth and precision, rather than brute force or overwhelming firepower. They paused to assess the situation. One of them knelt beside a fallen enemy, carefully checking for movement. Another silently noted the positions of the others, tracing the unit's failed formation with a practiced eye. They whispered among themselves, the tone of disbelief thick in the air. Their words were clipped, tactical, professional, but the awe beneath their tone was unmistakable. Who? One of them began, voice tight. No one, another replied. Nothing that makes sense. The formation, the timing. Precision beyond what we can account for. From the ridge above, she watched them. She didn't move, didn't descend. Her rifle remained slung across her back, her stance casual yet alert. They had trained for this moment, rehearsed scenarios countless times in simulators and remote forests. And yet, they were powerless to prevent the outcome she had orchestrated alone. They had relied on technology, on numbers, on coordination. She had relied on silence, patience, and memory. The difference was stark. Her heart, steady through the operation, finally allowed a quiet acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. She had neutralized the threat with surgical efficiency, removed the danger that had eluded even elite teams, and ensured the safety of countless innocents. Yet she felt no triumph. Recognition was irrelevant. Praise was meaningless. The mission was the measure of her success, and it had been achieved flawlessly. The seals finally looked up and caught sight of her on the ridge. A moment passed, tension crackling silently between them. They had heard rumors of her reputation, of a retired operative whose skill had once bordered on legend. And now they were seeing the evidence, undeniable in its execution, though they could not fully comprehend it. They realized that the myth they had heard about was real. Respect registered in their eyes, quiet and unspoken. They didn't approach her immediately, unsure if the phantom they had witnessed would acknowledge their presence at all. She remained still, observing. For them, this was awe tempered with humility. For her, it was irrelevant. She had not returned for admiration. She had returned because the work demanded it. The SEALs began the debrief, calling in communications to higher command, reporting the elimination of the enemy unit. Yet even their words failed to capture the full scope. They described success in clinical terms. Unit neutralized, minimal casualties, objectives achieved. They omitted the single factor that had made it possible, the silent operator, unseen, calculating, and unflinching. Her presence would remain unrecorded, her skill unacknowledged in official reports. She slipped quietly down from the ridge. When the reports were complete, moving in a controlled rhythm, retracing the paths she had memorized during her approach. Every step was deliberate, leaving minimal trace. The SEALs, focused on assessment and securing the area, did not notice her departure. The forest absorbed her once more, the mist curling around her as though reclaiming her from the battlefield. Later, in her quiet house, the weight of the night's work settled over her. She set the rifle carefully on its stand, cleaned again, and returned it to its hidden compartment. The precision rounds were stored, ready for the unlikely day they might again be required. She allowed herself a single deep breath, and for the first time that day, relaxed her shoulders. Yet peace was fleeting. Memories of the enemy's movements, the sounds of snapping twigs, the tension in each moment, lingered in her mind. She replayed scenarios, analyzed mistakes that hadn't occurred, and examined possibilities she hadn't used. Even in success, she evaluated, corrected, and refined a habit she could never abandon. Her mind was a battlefield of its own, calibrated by years of experience, unrelenting in its demand for perfection. Outside, the town remained ignorant of the threat that had nearly touched its borders. Life continued as though nothing had happened. Children played in the streets, neighbors went about their routines, and the small white house with faded shutters appeared just as it had before. No one suspected the events that had unfolded in the darkness. No one guessed that their safety had depended on a single hidden figure who had moved silently through danger and returned unscathed. For her, the mission's completion brought no accolades, no congratulations, no recognition. It brought only the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled. She reflected on the disparity between the world's ignorance and her own awareness, the contrast between ordinary life and the extraordinary efforts that preserved it. Her skills, honed through years of shadowed operations, had prevented catastrophe, yet she remained invisible to those she had protected. She thought of the SEALs, their awe and respect unspoken but evident. They would carry the knowledge of her actions silently among themselves, a quiet acknowledgement that some legends were best left unrecorded. And in that knowledge, she found a measure of companionship, even if fleeting. Her solitude was not loneliness. It was a choice, a necessary distance from the chaos she had once navigated and had now tamed once more. She understood that the world would never need her to step forward publicly. The act itself, the fulfillment of duty, was enough. It was always enough. As dawn broke fully, painting the town in warm light, she stepped onto her porch briefly, surveying the quiet streets. Her dog wagged its tail, sensing her calm, and she smiled faintly. She had returned to a life of peace, ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in its protection. The hidden battles she had fought ensured that ordinary life could continue without disruption. That, she decided, was the greatest reward. Her neighbors would never see her as the warrior who had silently safeguarded them. They would never know the risks she had faced, the precision required to succeed, or the discipline that had kept her alive and the enemy defeated. And that was exactly as it should be. She did not seek validation. She did not seek attention. She had acted because it was necessary, and she had acted alone. Even later, in the quiet of her home, she replayed the night in her mind. The calm, the precision, the patient observation. She relived every step, every breath, every calculated decision. And she felt the same mixture of satisfaction and detachment she always did after missions like this. The enemy was gone. Lives were preserved. And yet the world would continue, oblivious to her existence, as it should. By evening, the forest had returned to its natural rhythms. The mist evaporated in the sunlight. Animals resumed their movements, and the earth absorbed the remnants of the night's violence. The enemy unit's absence was now just a void, undetected, unremarked upon, a danger that had been erased. The mission's success existed in the quiet, as all her work did. She poured herself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and gazed out the window at her small town. Ordinary life beckoned. There were groceries to purchase, errands to run, a quiet routine to maintain. The rifle rested in its hidden compartment. The rounds were stacked. Her presence in the shadows remained unnoticed. And yet, in her mind, the clarity of purpose and the knowledge of a mission flawlessly executed filled her entirely. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had acted alone, precisely, efficiently, with unwavering focus. She had done what even elite teams could not, and she had returned unscathed, invisible to the world. That, she understood, was the mark of true effectiveness. Recognition was irrelevant. Duty had been fulfilled, and that was sufficient. The night came again, silent and watchful. She checked her rifle one final time before settling in. The mission had ended, but her vigilance, her instinct, her readiness would never wane. She had returned to ordinary life, but she carried the extraordinary within her, quiet and uncelebrated as it had always been. And in that quiet, in the ordinary, she found the truest form of victory. The town woke slowly the next morning, stretching and yawning beneath a pale sky. Life continued as though nothing had happened. Children ran down streets in laughter, neighbors exchanged greetings across white picket fences, and the faint aroma of coffee drifted from open kitchen windows. To anyone looking from outside, nothing had changed. Yet beneath the surface, the world was slightly safer, a danger erased silently by hands no one would ever see. She rose early, as was her habit, moving quietly through her home. The rifle remained in its hidden compartment, clean and ready for the day it might again be needed, but now it rested. She brewed coffee, poured it carefully into a chipped mug, and sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the sun began to light the rooftops, scattering shadows across the quiet street. Her dog padded around her feet, tail wagging faintly, sensing her. Calm, but not knowing the magnitude of the night that had passed. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle into her hands. There was satisfaction here, yes, but also a peculiar emptiness. She had acted alone, decisively, flawlessly. She had accomplished what even elite teams could not, had dismantled a dangerous enemy unit, and ensured that countless lives were preserved. Yet there was no acknowledgement, no recognition, no medals or headlines. She was unseen as she had always been. The world moved on, unaware of the shadow that had moved through it. Her reflection in the window caught her attention. A woman with calm eyes, composed and alert. Ordinary, even mundane, if one ignored the depth of experience behind the gaze. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Ordinary life was her armor, but she knew she was not truly ordinary. No one would see what she had done or could do, but that was exactly how she wanted it. The absence of recognition allowed her to continue quietly, the hidden protector who walked among civilians, unaware of her vigilance. She walked through her small town, carrying the same sense of quiet purpose she had always maintained. Grocery, shopping, chatting briefly with neighbors, walking her dog along familiar paths. Everything appeared ordinary, yet every step was measured, every movement controlled. Her senses remained alert, attuned to sounds, shadows, and the rhythms of daily life that might conceal unexpected danger. Even in routine, she was ready. The seals had departed by mid-morning, leaving behind only whispered acknowledgments of her actions. They did not speak openly of her deeds, understanding that the story could not leave the shadows. Their respect was quiet, professional, internalized, and it was enough. She had operated in silence, and they recognized that true skill sometimes required invisibility. Later, in her home, she reviewed the night mentally, running through each movement, each calculation, each shot. She imagined the enemy unit in their final moments of confusion, the errors she had anticipated, the strategic patience that allowed her to dismantle them without alerting her team above. Even in success, she analyzed, refined, and cataloged every detail, knowing that preparation and vigilance were eternal companions. She allowed herself no indulgence in pride. Duty was its own reward. The quiet evening arrived, and she stepped outside again, watching the sun sink behind the distant trees. Shadows stretched long across the ground, yet she did not move. She allowed herself a pause, a rare stillness, letting the night settle over her town as though she were an invisible guardian whose presence went unnoticed. The contrast between the ordinary world and the extraordinary actions she had taken was stark. For her, that contrast was comforting. It reminded her that heroism need not be public to be vital. Her dog barked softly at a passing stranger, and she smiled faintly. Life went on, unaware of the risks she had mitigated, unaware of the precision and patience required to neutralize a threat without leaving a trace. She reflected on the nature of her existence, a life split between normalcy and the extraordinary, a duality that she alone navigated with grace and discipline. Ordinary eyes could not comprehend it, nor did they need to. Night fell fully, and she moved through her home once more. She checked the rifle one last time before returning it to its compartment, ensuring that everything was as it should be. Supplies packed, weapons cleaned, routes memorized. If danger ever returned, she would be ready, as she always had been. But for now, there was peace. A fragile, quiet peace that she had earned and preserved alone. She thought of the SEALs again, the awe and respect that they had shown silently, and the enemy unit that had fallen without their realizing how completely they had been outmaneuvered. The mission had been flawless, but its perfection existed in invisibility. The world would never know her role, would never see the calm precision with which she had struck, would never understand the patience required to succeed alone. And yet, she did not need them to understand. The outcome was proof enough. The night deepened further. Stars glittered faintly above her roof, distant witnesses to the world continuing uninterrupted. She felt a sense of completion, though it was subtle, almost imperceptible. There were no cheers, no accolades, only the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and the assurance that her town, her country, had remained safe. That was enough, always enough. She prepared for bed with deliberate care, her movements calm and efficient. The rifle remained stored, rounds secured, mind alert yet resting. Even as sleep beckoned, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on what she had done, the precision of her actions, and the lives saved because she had been willing to step back into the shadows. Her life of normalcy remained intact, but she carried within her the knowledge of extraordinary impact, invisible and uncelebrated, yet utterly real. The next morning, the town awoke once again to ordinary life. The streets were filled with familiar routines, children laughing, neighbors greeting each other, the faint sounds of distant work beginning anew. And she stepped outside into it seamlessly, part of the mundane, yet carrying the weight of the extraordinary in her awareness, in her readiness, in her calm resolve. She was present yet unseen, ordinary yet vital, invisible yet powerful. No one would ever know her name. No headlines would follow her deeds. The history of that night, of her precision, patience, and singular resolve, would exist only in her memory, catalogued and preserved like the maps and weapons she maintained. And that was exactly as it should be. Recognition was irrelevant. Impact was everything. She walked through the town square, greeting a neighbor briefly, smiling faintly, her eyes scanning casually yet attentively. A small child waved, and she waved back. The simplicity of the gesture, a reminder that her work allowed innocence to continue uninterrupted. That was her reward. Quiet, unseen, absolute. Even in sleep, she remained vigilant. Dreams were interlaced with the rhythm of calculation, observation, and movement, rehearsals of possibilities that might arise, contingencies for threats that might never come. It was the life she had chosen, the life she had always inhabited, and she bore it without complaint. The ordinary world continued, ignorant of her presence, while she carried the extraordinary within her. In the fading light of evening, she sat on her porch once more, sipping tea, watching the shadows lengthen. The town was quiet, safe, unaware. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, of acknowledgement, of silent pride. She had stepped back into the darkness when needed, acted with precision and resolve, and returned to ordinary life without disturbance. The balance was restored, the threat eliminated, the world untouched, yet protected. And as night fully descended, she stood and looked toward the horizon, the stars above a faint glimmer of witness to what had been accomplished. She was alone. She was unseen. She was ready, vigilant, patient, and precise. And in that quiet, in the ordinary that surrounded her, she found her peace. The hidden elite had completed her mission. And then, like the shadows from which she had emerged, she faded back into silence.